Welcome to the Qasim Rashid Show, a civil rights lawyer here to expose all forms of injustice with a sprinkling of dad jokes in between. Here's your host, Qasim Rashid.
Good morning and peace be upon you this beautiful Sunday, wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Qasim Rashid, and this is the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show on the multiverse. And if you're listening on Substack, please do check us out by subscribing and sharing this content. Grateful for all your emails, your notes, your texts, your tweets. Means the world to me. Somebody said to me that I'm the last honest journalist that they can trust. And I've never considered myself a journalist per se. I'm not trained as a journalist. I'm trained as an attorney. But I'm grateful that people find my content trustworthy, because at the end of the day, our integrity is all we have. So thank you. We got a great show lined up. Ariana Jasmine is here. She is a political commentator focused on progressive news, Middle East. She's been featured across the media spectrum. We'll bring her on in a second to talk about two really important topics. One, the Paris Olympics, and two, Netanyahu's speech at Congress and the war crimes he's committed, and Vice President Kamala Harris's response. I want to do a deeper dive in the show later about just a fact check of Netanyahu's speech, because we need to not allow that kind of propaganda to flourish unchallenged. And it was really nasty, dangerous propaganda. But I want to start just spending a few minutes. I'm only going to do a quick intro because I want to bring Ariana on and have the conversation with her about this French ban on hijab for Olympians. And a lot of folks don't realize this because mainstream media, legacy media, has completely failed to cover it in any kind of substantive way. But the French have enacted a hijab ban. Hijab traditionally refers to the head covering that women choose to wear, Muslim women in particular. It's no different than the habit that a nun wears, or I guess a form of a yarmulke that Jewish people wear. It's a head covering. It's a sign of respect. And the French have said that Olympians who are competing, even if they're not French, cannot wear it, which is just asinine to me, right? Ibtihaj Muhammad is a Muslim American fencer who would theoretically be banned from competing in France. And the reality is that this is not just an attack on Muslim women. This is an attack on women, period. If we're dictating to women what they can and can't wear, that's a fundamental attack on bodily autonomy. And France, unfortunately, has a history of attacks on women and girls. I talk about some of this a little bit later on, but what I wasn't able to get to, or what I want to talk about right now, is the history that France has of being abusive to women and girls. For example, there was a shocking report just a couple of years ago that since the 1950s, French churches and clergy have abused sexually more than 330,000 children. 330,000. That's not a typo or a misstatement. 330,000 children. Not one person has ever gone to prison. Not one person has ever faced prosecution. Not one church has ever been shut down. But in the guise of secular values, France is shutting down mosques. They're banning the hijab, calling that abusive to women and girls. It's a mind-boggling double standard. And look, adult women don't fare much better. A recent survey of women in Paris found that 100% of women in Paris reported suffering sexual harassment from French men in public transport. 100%. I mean, to go 100 for 100 is crazy to me. But that's the reality in France, and that's what they're ignoring. And especially with this 2024 Summer Olympics, which is dubbed as the Gender Equal Olympics, the French government has the audacity to dictate to Muslim women how they should and should not dress. Truly mortifying stuff. I'm going to bring on Ariana Jasmine in a minute to talk about it. But as you watch the Olympics, just keep in mind that this is the reality of what Muslim women are dealing with. Imagine just being denied the ability to compete after years and years and years of practice because you choose to also cover your head while competing. Fundamentally fascist, fundamentally flawed, fundamentally unforgivable. And France needs to fundamentally do better. All right, you're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126. When we come back from break, we're gonna bring on Ariana Jasmine, a young woman that I deeply admire for her work, her activism. She walks the walk, literally. We'll talk about her canvassing for Jamal Bowman as well. And then we're gonna do a deeper dive into Netanyahu's speech. Don't go away. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. I'm extraordinarily excited about our guest this week. Ariana Jasmine is here. She is a political and multi-niche creator focusing on progressive news and updates. If you're not following her on social media, you're missing out. She's across all platforms. She focuses on the Middle East, but her knowledge base, her experience base extends far beyond that. She's been featured in CNN, BBC, NBC, The Washington Post, many other national publications for her work and advocacy. I connected with her some time ago when we were on a panel together about how social media can be more effective in conveying messaging, especially kind of with the failure of legacy media. Ariana, so good to have you with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I was always aware of your content. I always knew who you were. And so I was really happy that we connected in that conference and on that panel. And thank you so much for having me.
You know, it's when you're in these spaces, you meet good people doing good work. And for me, these relationships are what matters the most. So it's great to have you. There's a lot to discuss. I wanted to start off by talking about what's happening with the Olympics right now in France. It's being dubbed as the Gender Equality Olympics, but there's a deep irony behind that because France has enacted or enforced their so-called secularism law that bans Olympians from competing while wearing the hijab. And my take on this is, and I want your take on this, but my take on this for those listening is very simple, that there shouldn't be a scenario where men are imposing upon women how they should or shouldn't dress. And to me, whether it's France forcing women to remove the hijab or Iran forcing women to wear the hijab, the problem isn't women or hijab. The problem is insecure men who are way out of bounds, forcing themselves upon women. This basic concept of personal autonomy and personal liberty here, to me, is sacred. And if the choice isn't with women exclusively, then there's a problem. And here you have France talking about the Gender Equality Olympics and about freedom and liberty, who literally gifted us the Statue of Liberty, which, by the way, is an Egyptian Muslim woman, now telling us that true freedom is dictating to women how they should dress. I find that a little absurd, and I'm a little bit disappointed that it hasn't gotten more media attention. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. It makes me also wonder, so I'm Iranian American, and I'm wondering, what does that mean for the Iranian women who are forced to wear hijab by the government? But now the French government is saying, no, you can't wear that hijab. So does that mean Iranian women can't even compete?
That's a good,
So
that's a really good question.
It really makes me worried because when we talk about this like bodily autonomy and her body, her choice, that extends through all different concepts, not just abortion. It extends through the hijab as well. You know, if a woman wants to wear a burqa or a hijab, if she doesn't want to wear that, she obviously qualifies for the Olympics. She's been training for this for 4 years, probably more, probably for decades. And it's just it's very sad. It's very upsetting. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe France does have a history of being against the hijab. I don't think this is their first time doing this. I just didn't think they were going to impose it in such an international, global way.
But you bring up, Ariana, a really significant point, because if you are an Iranian Olympian woman and you face a penalty for removing the hijab from Iran, but in France you face a penalty for wearing it, it's basically pick your poison at this point. And that's the conundrum you fall into when you have these absurd laws that force, these kinds of things upon women. And to your point about this isn't new in France, you're right. In 2004, they banned the hijab in public schools. In 2010, they banned it in public spaces. And I was doing some history and some research in this space. This month in July, they banned a soccer player from wearing the hijab on the field. They banned individual girls from wearing the abaya at a state-run school. They fined a woman $575 for wearing a burkini, despite her renting a pool for private use. And then they made sure the pool was cleaned. I mean, they cleaned the pool because a Muslim woman swam in it. I mean, this to me is very similar to cleaning the pools in the 1950s after Black people swam in them. France even forced cancellation of a European campaign that celebrated Muslim women who chose to wear the hijab. And so for me, this isn't just a policy, it's exporting extremism. And this is the part that really gets me. There was this really horrifying case, and I'm going to talk about rape and sexual violence, so content warning. There's a horrifying case in France a couple of years ago where a group of firefighters repeatedly raped a 13-year-old girl. And they filed suit, and the Supreme Court of France ruled that these firefighters cannot be charged with rape because this 13-year-old somehow gave consent. And there was mass outrage in France, and France finally passed a law that that enacted an age of consent. So this happened like 3 or 4 years ago. There was no age of consent. I'm sorry, maybe a decade ago, but there's no age of consent laws in France, even a decade ago. They finally passed age of consent laws, and they arrived at 15 as the age of consent in France. And so what's wild to me, the reason why this ties to hijab is in France, 15 is the age of sexual consent, but 18 is the age of consent on how you dress yourself. Like, does that make any sense to you? Am I crazy?
No, I think that, first of all, I didn't even know about that. So thank you. I can't even believe the age of consent is 15. That's insane. For me, that's a wild concept. You know what I mean? The fact that the age of consent is 15, that's insanity.
Nuts.
But also, I feel like we see mirrors of this in America too, because, there's certain things that I believe, for example, when you're 18, you can take out these massive college loans. No one really explains to you what they mean. No one, a lot of students are signing these loans with hefty, prices that's tied to their name. They go through school for 4 years, they rack up $100,000-$200,000 of debt. And then later on, they realize, oh, this is what I did. I wish I would have known sooner that this is what I signed up for. So it kind of reminds me of America in some ways too, but no, it doesn't make sense. And I think that's what happens when you have governments that elect politicians that don't represent the people. You end up forming these laws that don't really make sense. You know what I mean? And
there have been attempts by Muslim women in France to change these laws. Sarah Zemahi ran as a progressive candidate. She was picked up by President Macron's ruling party to run as a slate, but then they realized she wears a hijab. So because of that, and citing that reason, they dropped her and said, we can no longer support you, and blocked her out from getting elected. So people who are like, well, the law is so bad, why don't people get elected to change it? Well, they can't, because they're specifically targeting them. And then you wonder why Marine Le Pen gets so much influence in places like France. It's because you're enabling these fascist policies, right? And I'm the staunchest supporter of secular governance. I don't want theocracy. There should be a strict separation of religion and state. People should be allowed to worship or not worship however they like without any government interference. But secularism doesn't mean elimination of faith. It means equal justice for all people, regardless of faith or no faith. If you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Ariana Jasmine, brilliant mind, brilliant political commentator. We're talking about the Olympics. Ariana, I want to make sure I give you a chance if you have any final comments there, but I also wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk about Netanyahu's speech before U.S. Congress. And I have my thoughts, but I wanted to throw it to you first. What's your initial reaction?
Yeah, in regards to France, I don't have much more to add. I do hope that they eventually become more, become nicer towards Muslim people and Muslim women. It's really sad that we still have to deal with this in 2024. I mean, it seems like the war on terror propaganda that the Pentagon fabricated back in 2000 is really making its rounds in France. So it's really sad to see. But in regards to Netanyahu's speech, I was actually watching it live, and it was incredibly, first of all, it was enraging because most of the things that he was saying were debunked and or misinformation, just were not true. Most of the people who were watching him speak were Republicans, and they were Republican staffers. And, you know, Kamala didn't show up at the speech, which I felt like was a glimmer of hope, given how the Democrats and the DNC and this administration was going to move forward when it comes to Palestine policy. But, you know, we took a step back. We saw how Kamala made her decisions throughout the week, and it seems like she's kind of just parroting what Joe Biden did. I mean, I did have a little bit of hope, but she took a picture with Netanyahu. She originally came out with a speech. She said her speech was centering around Palestine in the original speech. It was a tweet. She deleted that tweet, and then she ended up redoing a speech later on that day and posting that, which really centered Israel, and Palestine was more of an afterthought in that speech as well. So this whole entire week was very disheartening. And I think the part that really broke my heart the most was Rashida Tlaib standing alone in that crowd. That was really what broke my heart, because all of these lawmakers say that they're allies, that they, quote, stand with, well, they didn't say this directly, but they didn't show up because they disapproved what Netanyahu is doing in Palestine, in Gaza and the West Bank. But you know, when it came to actions, the only person that was standing there and very vocally protesting it was Rashida Tlaib, and she was alone. Now, I do understand for many of the squad members that, you know, what happened to Jamal Bowman was very recent and AIPAC's threat is very real. But at the same time, it really shows you how alone Rashida is in that fight for her people. And it was just very disheartening. It was sad, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Somebody posted a picture of Rashida standing alone with the sign that said war criminal, and compared it to the photo of like 1930s Germany, of everybody standing for Hitler and one person refusing to. And you know, I know Rashida. I've spoken with her, and I know how exhausted she is. She's told me how exhausted she is and how much more work we need to do. And I think it's because of reasons like that that I don't give up hope in our political system, that we need to keep fighting. We need to keep pushing. It's you know, James Baldwin talks about this, right? That I can't tell my children that it's hopeless, right? I can tell them it's difficult, but I can't tell them to despair and that they have no future. And that's why, despite how terrible things are, I continue to push forward. I'm paraphrasing, but the key element is that he's like, I will not succumb to hopelessness. It's just not possible. As long as I can still do the work, I'm going to continue to do the work. And so in times like this, I've a lot of folks reach out to me and say, it just seems hopeless. And I'm like, I agree, it does. And that's just what we're called to do. That's what we're called to accomplish. And so echo a lot of your sentiments. Just the amount of misinformation and disinformation in Netanyahu's speech was through the roof. There's I can't remember the social scientist's name, but he talks about how the purpose of all this misinformation is not just to confuse people, but it's to exhaust people so that they just give up and say, you know what, F it, the hell with it, I can't deal with this anymore. And I think that's kind of what he was trying to do, right? Regurgitating the burned babies lie, which the New York Times printed without any sense of shame or decency, making the claims that that, you know, he is standing between Iran destroying the Western world, like, for crying out loud. I mean, this was the same, you know, war drums he was beating for Iraq. And he came to Congress and said, I assure you, if you take out Iraq, it will stabilize the entire region. Well, had the exact opposite effect. And, you know, I think you would need to be a damn fool to listen to this person now, knowing how thoroughly he's lied. I will say this. I ran for Congress against a guy named Bill Foster, who attended Netanyahu's speech and then put out this meandering, slimy statement saying that, well, I only went to out of respect for the people of Israel. Well, dude, 72% of the people of Israel want Netanyahu gone as well, right? And so just the excuses that they're giving is truly horrifying. And I'll close with this, but I wanted to ask you about what Harris needs to do. I'm still holding on to some shred of optimism with Kamala Harris, because even what she said regarding the Palestinian people and regarding emphasizing a complete withdrawal of the Israeli military from Gaza, of establishing an independent Palestinian state, and she used the words dignity and self-determination for the Palestinian people, and the fact that she will not be silent on Palestinian suffering. These are all things that Biden hasn't said or hasn't done. And while I agree words alone are not enough, I still appreciate it's a step forward. It's not nearly far enough. I want to be very clear. So don't come into my DMs, people listening, and say I'm appeasing. I'm not. I'm saying that the pressure that we've been putting to get to this point, while it's not as far as we want it to be, it still is directionally aligned. And I think if we continue to put the pressure and stay involved and stay active and let her know this is what you need to do if you want to not just earn our vote, but our time and our money and our activism, I think we can move the ball in the right direction. Am I being too optimistic?
I believe that optimism is needed, especially when you're working within politics or you follow politics, because it can be so discouraging on a daily basis. So I'm not one to be against optimism, but I will say I really need to see what she does before I make a statement, because I just like I've been hearing myself and many other people have been we've been hearing words. I mean, I can't tell you how many times this administration has said that they have a ceasefire deal on the table.
Yes.
It just
Yes.
isn't, it just doesn't work. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? So I do think there is a slight shift in how the administration is speaking about Palestine. Definitely. I do have to emphasize that I don't think that's nearly enough.
No.
I'm not very impressed, if I'm going to be honest with you. But I do believe the pressure is working 100%. I believe that we have to continue to put the pressure on. For example, I know that there's a couple of protests that are going to march up to the DNC, which I think is very important because the DNC is going to have a lot of high-ranking people within the Democrat Party there, and they need to hear people's voices. But what I think Kamala needs to do in the future, I think if she does not pass a ceasefire deal, a permanent ceasefire deal to be specific, by November, it's going to be very hard to sway the pro ceasefire people. I understand that there's always going to be a group that's going to vote blue because they understand what a Trump presidency means. But when we're talking about the swing states like Michigan, you're not going to sway them if it's just words. It's not going to happen. I'm not convinced. So if she passes a permanent ceasefire deal prior to November, I think she has a good chance of locking down the presidency. If she doesn't, I think it's going to be a toss-up. That's what I think.
I think that's well said. And if you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Ariana Jasmine, a political commentator, speaks about not just the Middle East, but about a broad range of human rights issues that I've been super impressed by. So I'm glad to have her on here. The message that I've been giving to anyone who will listen, especially folks in her camp, is if she were to come out and just make a very clear statement that, look, there's no contradiction. In fact, there is alignment in saying that you want a secure Israel and you want a secure Palestine. That's justice. That's how we move forward. And if you truly believe in a secure Israel, you do that by ensuring that Israel is held accountable to international human rights law, that Netanyahu is held accountable to international human rights law, and we stop this ongoing siege, this genocide of Gaza. And then acting, and as you said, Ariana, of enforcing that really basic ceasefire deal. I think that she would activate young people, people of color, Muslims, South Asians, people from an Arab or Middle East background, that to a point where she'll win by 10 million votes. I mean, I don't even think it'll be close. I think we'll see numbers beyond what we saw in 2008, because to me, the economy is doing better. COVID is gone. We're seeing some major accomplishments with the CHIPS Act, the infrastructure bill. There's a lot of good things to run on, but you're not going to convince people whose family and loved ones are suffering a genocide to let that eclipse the actual life and basic humanity of 2 million people in Gaza, and then the millions more living in the West Bank. And so I'm hopeful that she does that. How much do you think other issues are going to play a role in this election? Let's talk about something like abortion, for example, because the right-wing MAGA nut jobs have just completely jumped the shark on this issue. And I'm kind of shocked at how bad they are on this, right? Like every polling that we've seen, right? 64% of Americans support abortion access. 86% support IVF access. And yet they keep doubling down on the wrong side of this. Do you think that's enough to carry Harris through the presidency?
I don't. I'm gonna be honest
Really?
with you, I don't. I let me be clear. I think in 2022 we saw a huge, what we like to call, blue wave because of the SCOTUS
From Roe, yeah.
taking away Roe v. Wade. So we know that it's very like abortion access is very popular amongst both sides of the political spectrum. We know that for a fact.
Yeah.
But I do believe that people have, and I may be a little bit biased here, so I just want to give that disclaimer, but I feel like what people have been consuming and seeing for the past 10 months is just very hard to watch. And although I do believe that the Biden administration did make some strides in some areas, they still had a lot of work to do, in my opinion. And that's with any presidency, right? They promise the world, they deliver what they can deliver. I do think Biden did try. I think he was stopped by courts when he did try to do many different things. For example, student loan debt, the court stopped him. So there were different things where the court stopped him, but I don't know. I think what might push Kamala to winning the presidency is Project 2025, actually.
Yeah.
I think that might be what triggers people to vote for her. I don't think it's going to be abortion alone, though. I think it has to be the messaging of like Project 2025 altogether is going to be a threat, and
Yeah, I
that
think
will
fair.
sway people.
I think that's fair. And to their credit, I was reading a poll about how Project 2025's approval rating is like in the low teens at this point. They've done a pretty good job so far of kind of sounding the alarm. I was chuckling to myself when Trump was on stage at a rally recently, saying flat out, like, they're painting me as a felon and her as a prosecutor. I mean, she's won the framing argument. If he's admitting that and saying that and repeating her talking points, she's won the framing argument. I think just this issue, this really critical issue of Israel-Palestine is going to be huge. I saw that the UK is starting to fund UNRWA again, which is huge because Israel demanded that people stop funding UNRWA because of alleged terrorism ties. There's no evidence of that whatsoever, not a single shred of it. It was a complete lie and fabrication by the Israeli government, by the Netanyahu regime. And the UK, the new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, I think is his name, has said that they are going to withdraw their objection to the ICC prosecution of Netanyahu. So if and I think when these warrants are issued, this would mean that if Netanyahu travels to the UK, he would be arrested on site upon landing. That's a pretty big thing because now the US is the only country left that is defending Netanyahu on these war crimes. And to me, that's not a good place to be, first of all. But second of all, and I don't think people realize this, my wife pointed this out to me. Nelson Mandela was on the terror watch list until 2008 in the USA. I mean, this man opposed apartheid. He's on the terror watch list until 2008. The ICJ is pointing out that Netanyahu is enforcing apartheid, and he's being invited to speak to US Congress. What does that mean for the future of the US? How do we reconcile that with these claims of liberty and justice? Like, what are young people supposed to do with that information? It's not a real question. I guess I'm more ranting, but I want your thoughts on this.
I think that's such a loaded question. And as a person that's a part of I'm a Gen Z millennial cusp, so I'm 28 years old. And I I think for the younger generation right now, having hope is very hard because we're drowning in student loan debt. We probably will most likely never be able to buy a home, majority of us. Majority of us actually had to move back into our parents' house because we can't afford it. And we're simultaneously watching our government throw billions and billions and billions of dollars to a quote war, end quote, that we can't even fully justify. Like it doesn't even make sense. So I think for us, in order for us to gain hope again, I think we need to end this. We need to call for a permanent ceasefire, and we just need to start on a new chapter. It's just, I think that's just the way we have to do it because you're funding so many different things, especially this, let me put it this way. We're funding wars without any kind of question.
Yeah.
We're censuring the only Palestinian lawmaker in federal politics in America, but we're inviting the war criminal that's about to get a warrant for his arrest by the ICC. So we're seeing all these disparities, and I just want to end with this one point. Back in 2000, when America was making all of its arguments to justify the war in both Iraq and Afghanistan, we didn't have social media. And the generation of Middle Eastern and Muslim people who were in America were people like my parents who were scared to death to even speak out or say that they're Iranian in public. But now you have a generation of young people like myself who are like, you know what? I don't really care. I'm going to say what it is. I'm going to show people the truth on social media, and you can decide whether you want to support this or not. So I think that a lot of the disapproval rating, which by the way, this disapproval rating for the war in Gaza is across all spectrums of politics, both Republicans, independents, as well as Democrats.
That's right.
And I think this is fueled because of social media, because the government is still peddling the same lies. Social media and people on social media are coming out and saying, hey, this isn't true because of X, Y, and Z. And so bringing it back to hope and young people, I just think this government really needs to make a shift, and we need to start focusing on our people in America. We have veterans that are sleeping on the street. We have students that are going to college that are homeless because they can simply just not pay for rent. Student loan debt is still a huge problem. Medical debt is actually the biggest debt form that we have in the US. And so we need accessible health care. We need, veterans to be housed.
Yeah.
We have so many issues in this country that we need to focus on. And in order to get the hope going for the larger majority of young people, we need to start investing in young people and showing like, hey, we care about you. You can't keep pitching to young people as a Democrat Party, but not doing anything for them or making it feel to them like you're not doing anything for them or prioritizing them. So that's all I have to say. Sorry, I know that was long.
Beautifully said. No, beautifully said, Ariana. If you're just tuning in or speaking to Ariana Jasmine, political commentator, and you're exactly right. The levels of wealth and income inequality in this country right now are as bad or worse than they were before the Great Depression. And it's just unsustainable at this point. It is beyond unsustainable. And I just can't fathom what it would be like to be graduating college right now. I mean, I was in college when the Iraq War started, and I remember how devastated we were at that point. If you had told me back then that 20 years from now, you're going to cherish 2003 as the good old days, I would have been like, are you crazy? But that's exactly where we are right now. Ariana, we're down to our last couple of minutes. I want to save some time. I'd love to hear about what projects you're working on. How can folks support you? How can they follow you on social media and elevate your work as well?
Absolutely. Well, I'm a content creator on multiple different platforms. If you want to find me, you can just type in Ariana Jasmine. My name is the same on YouTube, TikTok, as well as Instagram, Twitter, Threads, all of the above. Currently, I'm working on making daily content, not just about the Middle East, but about different things that are, in my opinion, wrong. For example, corporate greed, what's happening in the Middle East. And I genuinely do my content from a humanitarian standpoint. So I always speak for the people. That's my platform. And so far, I'm still a part of the uncommitted crew. So if that aligns with your views, definitely please check me out. And thank you so much for having me. This has been so fun. I can't wait to hear how this episode sounds. And it was an honor. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's going to sound awesome. And honestly, even if you're not fully aligned with everything that Ariana just said, you need to listen to her because She brings receipts. She backs up what she says. And there have been, I got to find, there's one where you started, I'm like, I don't know if I agree with that. And by the end, I was like, oh, that's a really good perspective. I hadn't thought about that. So definitely check her out. You guys know I don't bring people on here as guests who only talk the talk. Ariana walks the walk, and I'm grateful for. I mean, I think with Bowman's campaign, you went out there to knock doors, didn't you?
I did. I was actually in Terrytown, which is very Republican, very upscale area. It was during a heat wave. Needless to say, I was dying. I knocked on it just really quick. I know we're at our
Yeah.
last minutes, but
No, no, we're good.
I was knocking on doors and I
Yeah.
was sweating. I was so tired. And this a couple of elderly women opened the door and I was like, hey, I did my pitch for Jamal Bowman, and they were like, well, Latimer comes and gives us cookies every week at the senior center. And I was like, oh God.
What do you do with that?
I was like, I came to New York for nothing. I'm just kidding.
Oh, I'm telling
But it
you,
was a struggle.
it is a struggle. But I think that's to me in the trenches, knocking doors. I've knocked thousands of doors. It is tough. Like I've had a lot of great experiences knocking doors. I've had people pull guns, and I'm like, okay, time for me to go. Yeah, it's crazy. I'll tell you one
Wow.
funny story. I knocked a door of a guy, and I'm like, hi, I think her name is think her name is Jamie. I'm like, hi, is Jamie home? And he's like, what do you want with Jamie? I'm like, oh, well, she's a voter, and I'm running for, blah, blah office as a Democrat, and I wanted to ask for a vote. And he goes, well, this is a Republican home. I'm like, I get that, but she's voted Democrat. And he's like, what kind of parent would I be if my kid is a Democrat? I'm like, a pretty damn good one. And he slammed the door shut in my face. I'm like, all right, well, I guess
Oh
I
no,
guess that is okay.
you outed
I
Jamie.
felt bad about that afterwards. Yeah, I'm like, geez, this is not good. But I mean, that's a serious issue, right? Where like parents and kids are completely split on these things. But again, the fact that you're out there having this conversation, Ariana, speaks volumes. And so tell me your social media handle one more time just so our listeners can hear it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah, Ariana Jasmine. So just Ariana, and then Jasmine. Sometimes I had to put some underscores, but if you just type in my name, it should come up.
Cool. And she's also, I'm following her on all the platforms too. So you can check her out there. Ariana, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
That is Ariana Jasmine. Make sure you check her out. Follow her across all the platforms. My favorite platform to follow her on is Instagram, but she's great on Threads and everywhere else too. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. That was Ariana Jasmine, an amazing, bright young woman who I cannot highly recommend enough. You give her a follow. She speaks kind of from the heart, brings the receipts, and speaks truth to power. I've really enjoyed her content, and I'm glad we were able to bring her on today. I want to wrap up this week's episode talking about Netanyahu's speech on a more granular level and do kind of a deeper dive on the misinformation and disinformation that came about. On July 23rd, the day before his speech, 500 Jewish Americans peacefully protested on Capitol Hill, demanding that the United States end its arms sales to the Netanyahu regime. And rather than making that the headlines, there was a couple of knuckleheads who painted Hamas, pro-Hamas graffiti and defaced public property, which is dumb. I'm not going to support it. It's stupid. It doesn't solve anything. James Zogby, an Arab Christian American, commented how this detracts from the actual message of people in Palestine. And I tend to agree with him. It's unnecessary, but nonetheless, I want to draw attention to the fact that more than 500 Jewish Americans protested on Capitol Hill, demanding that the United States end its arms sales to the Netanyahu regime. And Netanyahu comes out on July 24th and calls them anti-Semitic, which is wild to me. He called Jewish Americans peacefully protesting anti-Semitic. Just words apparently don't have meanings anymore. So he addresses Congress, and his remarks are filled with just numerous inaccuracies and misleading statements and flat-out lies. And there's about 10 that I want to debunk, because at the end of the day, we cannot allow this kind of misinformation to continue. One, he claims that there's an existential threat to Israel. He says that October 7 tells us that never again is now. And this is ironic, given that the ICJ has credibly accused him of genocide. The International Criminal Court has accused him of war crimes. The United Nations has accused him of extermination of Palestinian civilians. Even former chiefs of the IDF, even former directors of Mossad have labeled him, Netanyahu, as, quote, an existential threat to Israel. They wrote this in a letter to congressional leadership, calling Netanyahu out for his criminal actions and demanding that they stop giving him a platform. So are these Mossad chiefs, are these IDF chiefs of staff, are they now anti-Semitic too? Nonsense. Number two, he lied about the protests and ceasefire, as I mentioned. He claims that all these protests are being funded by Iran, which is nonsensical. There's zero evidence. He provides zero evidence. And first of all, not only does it provide zero evidence, but they're protesting for a ceasefire that Israel itself agreed to and then went back on their own word. So on what grounds can Netanyahu condemn protesters for agreeing with him? Not only is there no evidence that Iran is funding it, Netanyahu is the one going back on his own word. And again, it's just a kind of an MO for who he is. His regime has deliberately bombed safe zones more than 200 times. So he's not here for humanitarian principles. He's made clear that he will bomb if and how he pleases. And it's a complete smear tactic to call protests of him anti-Semitic when there are actual legitimate calls for peace and human rights. Three, speaking of anti-Semitism, he went on to say in his speech that criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism. This is a lie, and I've written about this before. Criticizing a government's policies is not the same as hating a people. Anti-Semitism is a hatred of Jewish people, which is condemnable without exception. Anti-Semitism is not the critique of the actions of the Israeli government. People have rights. Governments do not. People have rights. Governments do not. This distinction is crucial and must be understood to prevent the misuse of anti-Semitism. For example, if you criticize the government of Saudi Arabia, you're not Islamophobic. If you criticize the Islamic Republic of Iran, you're not Islamophobic. You're being critical of governments. And that's the way we should be able to have dialogue. Number four, on famine and aid in Gaza, he accuses the ICC prosecutor Karim Khan of anti-Semitism for stating that, quote, Israel is starving the people of Gaza. He says this is preposterous and we've gotten so much aid and Hamas is stealing the aid. Well, first of all, the UN has confirmed famine conditions in Gaza due to the Israeli blockade. According to the UN here, the UN says, we declare that Israel's intentional and targeted starvation campaign against the Palestinian people is a form of genocidal violence and has resulted in famine across all of Gaza. We call upon the international community to prioritize the delivery of humanitarian aid by land by any means necessary, end Israel's siege, and establish a ceasefire, end quote. Back in February, the ICJ condemned Israel's food blockade and ordered the Netanyahu regime to ensure aid reaches Gaza. And this allegation that Hamas is stealing aid, the US government itself admits that Netanyahu has provided no evidence whatsoever to substantiate the claim that Hamas is diverting aid. Instead, they themselves report, and there's video evidence of Israeli settlers being tipped off by the Israeli military blocking aid. Number five, Netanyahu says on civilians being killed that, quote, Israel has implemented more precautions than any army in history to protect civilians from harm, end quote, and that we've killed almost no civilians. This is a complete lie. The Lancet, the world's most prestigious medical journal, conservatively estimates that over 186,000 Palestinians have been killed due to direct or indirect results of Israel's bombing. As I said, on more than 200 occasions, he has bombed safe zones, places where they told Palestinians to go to be safe and then bombed that zone. That's deliberate, intentional killing. His regime has banned journalists and has killed over 108 journalists and media workers who are covering his military actions. His request for trust devoid of transparency is just reckless propaganda. 6, he says that this is a fight against Hamas. That's a fascinating claim because the reality is that Netanyahu has funded Hamas for years. This is well documented. How can the war be against Hamas when Netanyahu himself has funded Hamas? He's saying this to counter the reality that Americans are sick and tired of this war. Nearly 70% of Democrats and independents, as well as 66% of Republicans, want to end this war in the Middle East. They are sick and tired of funding it. They don't want their tax dollars going to it. So Netanyahu is trying to say that if we don't stop them now, they're going to come after us. No, they're not. Hamas is a reaction to Israeli occupation. End the occupation. No one is here defending Hamas. But the one who is funding Hamas is Netanyahu himself. That's well documented. The New York Times reported on it. The Times of Israel reported on it. This is who he is. And remember, because he's been funding Hamas to undermine the peace process, he is going to continue to find excuses to perpetuate war. Reject it. 7, he says that Netanyahu is the root of all the problems in the Middle East. And if we don't stop this regime now, they're going to get nuclear weapons, which is, again, a fascinating claim, given that Netanyahu himself unabashedly encouraged and bragged about convincing Donald Trump to dismantle the Obama-era Iran nuclear deal, which, by the way, had successfully prevented Iran from obtaining any form of nuclear weapons whatsoever. Of course, Netanyahu never has and never will bother to explain this contradiction, because doing so would further highlight his opportunism and dishonesty. 8, political violence and hypocrisy. He points out, he says, there is no room for political violence in democracies. Again, deeply ironic given his credible accusations of war crimes, extermination, and genocide. It's also hypocritical given that Israeli intelligence under Netanyahu threatened and spied on the ICC. The Guardian reported on this, by the way. Throughout this whole speech, by the way, Netanyahu profusely thanked Donald Trump, a man who has a documented history of anti-Semitic and racist comments, a man who called Nazis very fine people, a man who happily dined with Nazis in his own home, a man who, by the way, has inspired countless acts of political violence. Again, underscoring the hypocrisy of Netanyahu and the opportunism of Netanyahu. 9, he completely refuses to mention a genuine two-state solution where Palestinians have self-determination. And this speaks volumes. His vision for Gaza involves complete disarmament and lack of autonomy, which, by the way, no nation would ever accept. In fact, the Israeli parliament just sent they just passed a resolution opposing a two-state solution. Netanyahu's on record that he will never allow an independent Palestinian state. Israeli leadership has gone as far as to say that they will annex the West Bank. And even now, as the ICJ calls it apartheid, Israel continues to build illegal settlements on Palestinian land. It doesn't take a genius to realize that Netanyahu's siege on Gaza has little to do with justice and everything to do with expanding power and control over Palestinian land. And finally, democratic boycott. While Netanyahu claimed that his support with America is unbreakable, clear breaks are in fact forming. And one of the most telling indicators of Netanyahu's declining influence is the growing boycott. Back in 2015, the last time he spoke in Congress, about 50 Democrats boycotted his speech. Today, or this time, that number nearly tripled. It rose to 136. Netanyahu realizes he's losing support, and that's why he's becoming more and more extreme. And that's where I take hope, and I ask you to have hope and continue to put the pressure on your local members of Congress to ensure that we can hold this regime accountable and stop the U.S. from engaging in funding this regime for the continued war crimes. Netanyahu's speech was a despicable masterclass in misinformation. It echoed the Trumpian tactic of trying to overwhelm audiences with falsehoods in hopes of creating exhaustion and apathy. Do not be exhausted. He is desperate to deflect attention from his failed policies and try to put the blame on others. We must instead see through this propaganda and hold him accountable. He's no friend of the American people. He's no friend of global peace and justice. And as he now pushes for war with Iran, again, recall his incitement to encourage the United States to invade Iraq and the horrific consequences that came from about that. Someone who has been so wrong for so long should not be trusted again, and certainly not right now. And again, I'll close with this. In this run for the White House, Vice President Harris has a really unique opportunity to turn the page on a failed U.S. policy regarding Israel and Palestine. She can do so by upholding the Leahy Law, stop selling arms and sending arms that are enabling these war crimes, uphold international human rights law, and recognize the ICC's prosecution of Netanyahu, and recognize the will of the American people, right? 70% or more want this war to end and wants to stop funding it. Stop funding Netanyahu, start rebuilding Gaza, start conditioning aid on a complete ceasefire, on a release of all hostages from both sides, a withdrawal from Gaza and the West Bank, an independent Palestinian state, and actually rebuilding Palestine. That, my friends, is a path towards peace and security for both Palestine and Israel. Woo! All right, that was a lot. We are out of time. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe on my Substack. Be sure to share this with your family and friends. Thank you for listening in. We'll be back next week, same time, same place at 10 a.m. Eastern on Sunday. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Review Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. Until next week, peace.